Listeners is an original sci-fi action series produced by Studio Mappa and written by Dai Sato. When I watched the trailer for Listeners prior to its release last year, it became one of my most anticipated anime of the season. The way the trailer was cut and various elements of the show reminded me of Project IG's cult classic, Fooly Cooly. I thought that this show could be a spiritual successor to Fooly Cooly, given its rock soundtrack and crazy premise that seemed very much in line with what you would expect from that show. The story follows a teenager named Echo Rek and a mysterious girl who he finds one day while collecting trash at the garbage dump. After taking her home, he discovers that she has an output jack on her lower back, indicating that she is a player. Players are people who can control equipment, which usually transform into giant robots that they use to fight mysterious creatures called the Earless. Not much is known about the Earless, and humanity has been fighting against them for years. Unfortunately, the girl, who Echo names Mew after the core part he found, has lost all of her memories. After Echo and Mew defend the town of Liverchester from a horde of Earless, they set off on a journey to learn about Mew's identity and to find a mysterious player that Echo saw many years ago. I thought that the first episode did a decent job establishing the two protagonists and providing some insight into their world. I instantly liked both of these characters, and seeing them interact with each other was always entertaining. Echo is very similar to Izuku Midoriya from My Hero Academia in the fact that he's a huge player fanatic and is usually very polite. However, unlike Izuku, Echo doesn't have any lofty ambitions, and at the beginning of the series is content with how his life was going. Ironically, both of these characters share the same voice actor, Justin Brenner, who brings the same exact energy to the character. This was probably an easy paycheck for him, but he does an excellent job capturing the character's excitement as Echo and Mew meet other players along their journey. He's a perfect fit for the character, but honestly not his most memorable performance. I'm more impressed by Bryn April's performance as Mew. Aside from a couple of times where I thought her line delivery was flat, I think she nailed Mew's feisty and energetic personality. As Echo and Mew travel the world, meet new people, and encounter more Earless, Mew begins to question who she is and the incredible power she has. Besides the protagonist, there were a few supporting characters that I liked. Admittedly, most of these characters aren't incredibly fleshed out, but they at least bring some personality and another perspective on the world that Mew and Echo inhabit. Near, a student at a school for players, is introduced as a lonely, troubled orphan girl. Near's progression from a shy and manipulated girl to someone who is bolder and more direct could have been done better, but they do a decent job making her into a sympathetic character. I also enjoyed the brother-sister relationship that formed between her, Lyde, and Richie. The episode in which Lyde and Richie were introduced was one of the best episodes and was a nice change of pace in terms of character and overall setting. Unfortunately, Lyde and Richie were handled poorly by the end of the series. The antagonists are cliche, forgettable, or in one particular case, very annoying. I can't speak on some of these characters as doing so would spoil certain reveals and twists that occur. What I can say is that two of them have the typical villain motivations of destroying or ruling the world. There was another character that planned on profiting from the conflict with the Earless, but in the end he was uninteresting and paper thin. The worst antagonists in the series, in my opinion, were the Noise Sisters. I hated every moment these characters were on screen. Their accents in the English dub and weird speech pattern made it hard to understand a lot of their dialogue. Their accents in the English dub and weird speech pattern made it hard to understand a lot of their dialogue. I had to constantly turn on the subtitles and even switch to the Japanese dub whenever they were on screen. In general, I found myself turning up the volume on my television a lot due to the audio mixing. There were times where the character dialogue was too low compared to the soundtrack. The dialogue translation is mostly good aside from the Noise Sisters dialogue and some terrible lines from some characters like Mew. The changes made to Denka's scenes in the English dub was perfect. The character was inspired by Prince and was given this soft voice that reminds me of someone like Prince or Michael Jackson. I love that instead of yelling or shouting in certain scenes like in the Japanese version, the English dub has Denka singing instead. Listeners tackles themes of prejudice and identity through the ongoing conflict between humans and Earless and a couple of its characters. Unfortunately, it can be very heavy-handed in how it delivers its message of love and acceptance. The writing is inconsistent, there are at least a couple of plot holes, and there are some things that were never explained or simply don't make sense. I don't believe Studio Mappa intended for the series to be like Fooly Cooly, where it's purposefully abstract and might require multiple viewings to digest everything. The action is by far the weakest aspect of Listeners. Given that this released the same year as other works like The God of High School and Jujutsu Kaisen, the end product is a disappointment in terms of action and animation. I knew nothing about this animation studio back when I first saw the trailer for this anime, and people were hyping it up due to Mappa's involvement. Studio Mappa fails to deliver exciting mech battles, which is one of the selling points of the show that ties into the strange player concept. Listener's animation is mostly decent at best, and to their credit, there are only a couple of times where the animation looks bad. I don't think using CG for mechs instead of 2D animation was a good idea from a visual standpoint. The use of 3D probably saved them time and money, but this resulted in some rather unappealing scenes. The CG mechs come off as cheap, and most of their designs are largely unmemorable. There were times where they would not only make the robots CG, but the human players as well. This stuck out especially when they cut to another part of a scene where the same character is 2D again. The way that they switch between 2D and CG is jarring and very off-putting. There was also a really bad cut during an action scene in episode 6 that I couldn't ignore. The action scenes are largely unremarkable and forgettable. They rarely do anything interesting with the player battles, and in the one instance that they do, it's quick and it could have been done much better. For instance, Echo and Mew fight against a pair of players, Lisa and Wendy, who fight by switching control of their equipment during battle. This different style of fighting could have led to an interesting and challenging battle for Echo and Mew, but nope! This fight probably had the best choreography in the series, but that isn't saying much considering how uncreative and mediocre a lot of these fight scenes are. It's certainly one of the most memorable next to the final battle, but like I said, that bar is set really low. Once again, to give Studio Mappa credit, at least the movements of the mechs didn't look clunky, and I've seen worse CG in other shows. Aside from the action, there are a few good looking visuals, and the artwork is great overall. The character designs were unique, and I liked most of them besides Dinka. I initially thought that the default earless design looked uninspired and flat until later on in the series, where they got a bit more creative with some of them. Music is a core part of Listeners, and its world in which music has been long forgotten is interesting. Listener's soundtrack is great, but nowhere near as iconic or impressive as the music by the Pillows that bolster nearly every moment of Fully Cooley. I appreciate that Studio Mappa really went all in with the musical theme of the show, as they refer to each episode as a track, and each one has a different ending sequence and song. I actually liked a lot of the ending sequence music more than the soundtrack that plays during the actual show at times. The ending songs are quite varied. It's not just purely rock music. I believe Studio Mappa was going for a music video vibe with its endings, which is similar to what Production IG did with Fully Cooley, except it's just executed differently. I prefer the way music is used in Fully Cooley as opposed to how the ending songs are separated into a separate end credit sequence. Overall, Listeners is an interesting but very flawed series that fails to live up to its potential. So what did you think about this show? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, if you have an anime or manga that you would like for me to do a first impressions or review on, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/fearnohate, or you can donate via PayPal. Whether you decide to donate or not, thank you guys for watching. I'm out of here. Peace.